everyone who's joining us today. We will begin in roughly 1 minute, so settle in, grab a morning coffee or water if you're in Europe, or tea, and we'll start in 1 minute. Brian, and where did you travel in Europe? Was it like a round trip, or did you stay in any specific country?
We were in Italy for most of it, but I was also in Switzerland and Germany for part of it.
Nice.
Yeah, I saw quite a lot of Italy, especially the north, I should say, north of Rome. But I'm a bit of an Amaro fan, and so I was on a bit of a quest. So went to a lot of small kind of artisanal makers and also famous makers, and I've still got a case or two on the way from Italy. It's easier to ship it.
Stock up for the long winter.
Exactly. And for those of you who do follow my newsletter, you can see the big write up on that trip and what we learned and share some knowledge. But if you're not a subscriber, there'll be something we can bring up at the end.
For sure. All right, so we're 2 minutes in, so I think we can start. So once again, hi everyone. We're back with another edition of Bloomreach's Commerce Pulse Quarterly Roundtable. This is an event where we highlight the data we gather here at Bloomreach. So if you don't know, our solution powers e-commerce experiences for hundreds of businesses around the world, and we share all the data with you. So with the help of our panelists, we put those numbers into context and provide you and all of us with better understanding of where commerce stands today and what we can expect moving forward. I'm your host, Teresia, and I would like to introduce our panel for today. And let's start with Roxy. Roxy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Roxy Kaus. I am Director of Customer Experience here at Bloomreach. I've been in the e-commerce space for well over a decade now. I've led digital merchandising strategy for several Fortune 500 companies. I also have a background in UX and have led product design and UX strategy as well. Thank you for having me today. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Awesome. Let's throw the ball to Jason now for an introduction.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm Jason Hine. I'm Principal B2B Visionary at Bloomreach. I have been working in B2B for a little over 26 years. I got my start as a practitioner doing merchandising for McMaster Carr. Worked with them during their transition to online. Then moved over, was on the team that started up what has since become Amazon Business. Helped start that business up. And then, that was a fun little startup project. Seems like it's doing okay. 6 years of consulting and working with basically large and small, basically everything from Fortune 50 companies trying to establish digital strategy to small local family-run distributors trying to get their feet wet on the digital side. And I've been with Bloomreach now for, 3 years, almost 4 years, 4 years next year. Wow. And I do a little bit of everything. I do a little bit of work with product, a little bit of work with marketing, a little bit of work with sales, basically wherever they need me to go, I go and talk.
And today you'll talk here and share all.
I'll talk here. This is where
Awesome, thank you, Jason. And lastly, Brian, you don't need a lot of introduction, but just to keep it consistent and for the who joined.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Those of you who've been on Commerce Pulse before certainly know me. Former Chief Strategy Officer at Bloomreach, now running a small boutique advisory firm. I'll talk maybe a little bit more about that as we wrap up at the end. It's great to be here. Commerce Pulse is something we started very early on in the pandemic, so we could sort of keep tabs on what was happening with e-commerce and retail and B2B overall. And it's great to be back and in a sense hand off the baton. Again, I'll save my comments toward the end, but it's great to be here on a somewhat dark and cloudy morning. And if you look closely, you might be able to see all the leaves that I need to take care of. Maybe I'll get to that later today.
Yeah, we'll definitely have some leaves in the presentation as well, because today we're talking the third quarter of 2023. The fall is coming, holiday season is coming. And so the agenda for today is we'll look into 4 sections: a general overview, a look into apparel, grocery, luxury, and home furnishings and improvements. And then we have a look into B2B. And since we have Jason here, we have 2 B2B breakdowns for you: distributors and manufacturers. And lastly, we will end with a section on holiday season. So what sales figures we're expecting, what trends we're expecting. So definitely stay tuned for that. So to kick things off, I will start by sharing some key data points and the overall trends that we've seen this past quarter. All right, so let's start with North America. So we have seen sales have grown marginally and traffic experienced a slight dip as well. The conversion rate was on the rise at almost 4%, and the average order size has slightly decreased as well. Moving on to UK and EU regions, first off, we have seen a slight dip in sales and in traffic. The conversion rate was slightly up, as well as the average order size. Now, looking at data year to date, so let's first turn our attention to North America. We've seen a decrease in sales and in traffic. Conversion rate has also been slightly down, and there was a minor increase in average order size. Now, shifting gears to the UK and EU markets, it's been a little of different story here. Sales have shown an increase of around 6%. However, traffic has seen a small decrease of almost 3%. And in contrast, we've seen an increase in the conversion rate at almost 5% and a significant boost in the average order size of almost 20%. So with this in mind, I would just love to get an overview from all of you. We've seen the data moving up and down ever so slightly. EU and UK looks to be in a better shape than North America, especially year to date. So how should we be interpreting what's happening in the markets right now? And let's start with Roxy, and then we can hear from Brian.
Absolutely. So when I look at the North American numbers, we're comparing August to September timeframe, and we see a peak in performance due to back to school. So naturally, traffic is one of those metrics that will increase during this timeframe due to a ramp in marketing campaigns and promotions. However, seeing this positive trend month over month for conversion is super encouraging as we head into peak and holiday time periods, which we'll talk a lot about today. Not shown in the screen grab that you shared is the September year over year numbers. And we're seeing a positive trend for conversion when looking year over year for the month of September. I mean, peak is here. As in previous years, there's discussions around holiday starting earlier. And we see this in our data. As we were analyzing back to school purchase data and consumer behavior, it was very clear that customers are thinking about holiday season prep. Customers have already started exploring options for Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, especially Christmas in the home industry. So something to be on the lookout for. However, in looking at commerce overall, these year-over-year metrics, we're seeing more cautious spending, and the data really speaks to that. Consumers seem more okay with waiting for a deal, and you can see the industry really reacting to that. Example, Prime Day event number 2, which is happening today.
I'll just go ahead and jump in then. I think if we look at the kind of year-to-date numbers, we can sort of see that there's been a somewhat consistent trend throughout the year that did start to change in Q3, in the most recent month especially. From a macro perspective in the North American market, we've seen a shift this year from goods to services. So while the U.S. and North American economy overall is very strong, consumer spending has remained very strong despite some inflationary pressure and the cost of money, in a sense. Consumers have really been spending on vacations, on events, going to weddings, traveling again, and of course, dining out. If we look at the distribution of spending, it's really in dining and in travel where we've seen tremendous growth in consumer spending in North America, whereas goods has really lagged. And so you can see that reflected in the negative 13% in sales, and traffic also down year over year. In Q3, we've started to see this kind of shift and change. And again, as Roxy pointed out, back to school was, of course, a big signal for consumers refreshing their kids' wardrobes, getting them into clothes that fit, getting them ready. And of course, thankfully, kids are all back in person in school, which is great. And so we've seen that impact. In Europe and in the UK, we see something that is sort of annualizing some lower numbers. If you think about the impact of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia on the EU and UK economies, the impact on inflation, and naturally impacting how consumers felt about spending money, we then annualize those numbers. Earlier this year in February, unfortunately, that war continues, and so we've seen relatively good numbers year over year. However, there's a lot of indications that the EU and the UK are really on the precipice of a recessionary environment right now, and consumer spending is starting to constrict as we get into the fall. So we sort of see these two ships kind of passing in a sense in terms of the results, and it really reflects the differences in the economic environment between North America and Europe and the UK.
Thank you. Jason, your assessment of the general market, maybe something that we haven't heard.
I think the biggest factor I think on the B2B side is just availability of product and the gradual easing of prices. I was at a conference last week and people were basically saying if you couldn't make money as a B2B distributor in the last 2 years, then you're just not going to make money ever. Between the scarcity and price increases being taken up, it was a good couple of years to be a distributor, and I think we're starting to see that maybe slow down a little bit, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But I think we're looking at things to kind of continue to trend more level off. Like maybe people are looking at flat the next year, from what I was hearing from people, but we'll see what actually happens. There's a lot of year left before 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, if you're from B2B, definitely stay on because we'll take a closer look at that in just a few minutes. But now let's sink our teeth into the B2C e-commerce sectors. So starting with apparel. So we've seen dips year over year and year to date for sales and traffic, with conversion rate being slightly up year over year, but then negative year to date. And the average order size has been up year over year and year to date. So looking at these numbers, Brian, considering these apparel metrics and trends that we've seen, what stands out to you?
Yeah, I think apparel has had a bit of a tough year. Certainly entering the year over inventoried, trying to flush through still a lot of overstocks, really put a lot of pressure on margins, and there was a lot of discounting. So in a sense, the early part of the year off to a difficult start when you look at sort of sales comps and things like that. Conversion rate, for the year has also been under a lot of pressure. I think as the year goes on, and I think as we enter Q4, I think we will see some recovery, not only as assortments refresh, but people frankly, want to invest in their wardrobes, even though back to work trends, have lagged where a lot of people would like to see them or have hoped. And there's been certainly a trend really precipitated by the pandemic toward much more casual apparel and casual clothes. And that's not only true in North America. It was very clear to me in the fashion capitals of the world, like Milan, where I was recently, just how casual the average person dresses today, even out to a nice dinner. And so, that obviously is a lower price point as well. We'll talk about luxury, I know, here in a moment, which is a little bit of a different story. But apparel has had a bit of a struggle. But I think as we entered back to school, some recovery, and then I think as we get toward Q4 with winter, apparel, outerwear, and so forth, I think we'll see some recovery. But it's been a tough year, and I think most apparel retailers would reflect that, unless they're in the athleisure category, which remains very strong.
Yeah, the pandemic and working from home definitely changed my fashion style, as you can see. Roxy, any thoughts from you on apparel?
I would agree. It changed mine too. I don't think I owned a pair of sweatpants before the pandemic happened. But what the data says to me, and it speaks to Brian's point, is that retailers are being more promotional. So basket size and conversions are being driven up by the lower price points on items. However, this does come at the expense of revenue because now you need to sell more units than you did in previous years.
Yeah, and I think there's been margin pressure as well, in particular in the apparel category, because in order to move goods, you've got to discount and promote, and also lower price points in general. So it'll be interesting to see as the price for manufacturing globally has started to moderate, and there's some deflationary pressure in some of the major manufacturing centers, such as China and Southeast Asia. We may see that impact pricing in Europe as well as the United States, but it probably won't really start to be reflected until early next year at this point.
Yeah, and you see a lot of retailers, I mean, customers that we work with pushing private label. It makes sense. It's a margin play at this point, and that's critical here in the apparel sector.
Yeah.
Great insights. All right, so let's take a look at the grocery sector now. So we've seen a negative trend with sales and traffic numbers decreasing year over year as well as year to date. Conversion rate registered as 20% decrease year over year and year to date. But on the brighter side, we see average order size has seen a slight uptick both for year over year and year to date. So Roxy, can you give us a bit of context into these numbers? What's happening with the grocery market right now?
Yeah, so commerce for the grocery industry is very soft, and the data really speaks to that. There have been challenges around food prices, and it's due to the rising macroeconomic situations. I was actually looking at some data points from USDA, and food prices were expected to grow more slowly in 2023 than 2022, but still at historical average rates. I don't know if you've been to the grocery store lately, but it is very difficult to get out of the store without spending at least $200, at least from my experience. So naturally, this is having a huge impact on commerce, and we see that in the data.
Brian,
Yeah.
on the grocery landscape?
Yeah, I agree with Roxy. I think the interesting thing is it's kind of a tale of two different market segments. For a lot of consumers, it's really the kind of inflationary pressure and the cost overall in their lifestyle, where wages have not necessarily kept up, has meant that they're trading down. And that may not be reflected in Bloomreach's data, right? So going toward more discount grocers or wholesale clubs and things like that, enable them to reduce the cost of their groceries as much as possible. Also shifting to generic brands and other things, which is also reflected in the sales results, right? Since those price points are tend to be lower. On the upper end of the scale, you certainly see grocers able to maintain, given the demographics they're serving. But certainly grocery is also impacted by this shift to dining out that we already talked about. So the shift in consumer spending towards entertainment, towards travel, and dining out obviously has an impact on the grocery segment. And you can almost see kind of a correlation, the rise in services spending and the impact on grocery. And I think it just reflects consumers' desire to get out of the house and to have experiences and willing to spend, $200, $300 for a family to dine out, not even at a very fine dining establishment. It's kind of amazing. And obviously that's going to impact, how much they're cooking and dining at home. So I think grocery, it's interesting because it really held stable as the pandemic eased and we were sort of returning to some normalcy. A lot of people expected grocery to be impacted right away, online grocery to be specific. that didn't really happen. It sort of maintained in a very sort of steady state, even with some growth. But now I think it's really, you can't hide from the shift in consumer spending and behavior. So it has less to do with the channel and more just to do with how consumers are going about their lifestyles. I do think that will change again in Q4 and in the winter time. People are going to be in their homes. They're going to be dining and cooking at home in an increasing amount. And so I think we'll see that kind of moderate again, but it may not return to the growth rates that we saw previously, obviously.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's now shift our attention to the luxury sector. So we have seen a mix of successes and challenges for luxury. So despite the decrease in traffic and conversion rates year over year and year to date, we've seen a rise in sales for year over year and year to date. And there has been an increase in average order size, up 8% year over year and almost 3 year to date. So talking luxury, Brian, how was Q3 for the luxury sector? How should we read this data?
I mean, it's kind of a return to I'd say a sober kind of operating environment for luxury retailers and luxury brands who got very accustomed to significant growth exiting the pandemic. We were really accustomed to seeing 40, 45, 50% year over a year growth rates earlier this year in luxury. And toward the back end of last year, again, driven by travel, driven by getting out of the house, going to, that special culture event, going to the symphony, going to the opera, going to concerts. The concert, industry this year had a epic record-setting year, not just because of Taylor Swift and Beyonce, but everyone was touring, right? The number of shows that people wanted to go see, and they were going, spending a lot of money in a lot of cases, not only on the tickets, but on the experience around it, travel, as well as what they were wearing. And then, of course, things like weddings, graduations, all these things that people really wanted to go to, and they wanted to look their best. So they weren't wearing these luxury items necessarily to the office, but they were really driven and stimulated. Now we see, I'd say, a return to more normal kind of operating environment for luxury. Up 5% year over year is nothing terrible, but it's sort of modest, right? It's a modest growth rate. And if you reflect inflation, you're kind of keeping up with inflation at that rate. So nothing to really be super excited about, but still a very healthy market. But I do think we'll see a shift back towards more kind of commodity categories like apparel generally, as we enter, Q4 and into next year. So luxury may still have to kind of pay a bit of a tax for all the sales they drove, a year ago and earlier this year as we enter next season. And certainly the luxury market overall is impacted by some pretty significant macroeconomic and geopolitical activities right now. So we'll see if luxury ends up getting, kind of cooled off. But it was a pretty healthy year overall and a pretty healthy Q3 as well for luxury.
Roxy, anything you would add on luxury?
Absolutely. And speaking of concerts, I am saving my dollars for NSYNC, which they have not announced.
There you go.
But I am feeling very optimistic about the luxury sector. I mean, as we look at the year-over-year metrics, we see sales and average order size in the positive. However, the trends we see in apparel and other sectors has not skipped the luxury sector. They aren't screaming sell, sell, sell all over the homepage. But my hypothesis is that the reason we are seeing growth here is that they are being a little more promotional than they have been in the past. And consumers are really voting their approval with their dollars.
Awesome. All right, so let's breeze through home furnishings and home improvement because I know you're all eager to jump into B2B with Jason. Awesome. So starting with home furnishings, we faced a decrease in sales and traffic year to date. However, there's been an uptick in conversion rates of 20% year to date, and at the same time registering around 20% decrease of the average order size. Moving on to home improvement, we've seen a downturn in sales, conversion rate, and average order size with, I would say, a pretty drastic drop of over 50% for the last one. And then there was a 6% increase in traffic. So the last step on our B2C journey is home furnishing and improvements. Roxy, what's your take on the numbers that we're seeing on this slide?
Sure, absolutely. And home improvement, I mean, during the pandemic, everyone was doing more projects around their home. So it's I don't think we're doing as many projects, so that could be a shift in why we're seeing the year-to-date numbers. But home furnishings and home improvement are two industries that are also very soft this year. However, there are some metrics that aren't shown, and I was looking into search average order size and search conversions. For both industries, those are positive as we look at month over month and year over year. So focusing in on the search experience, no searches, ensuring your head terms and no revenue queries are optimized is critical for this space. And also innovations around search and merchandising is so important to the overall experience. So really investing there is important. It may feel like low-hanging fruit as I talked about optimizations, but with sales and core KPI trends the way that they are, it's so important to not leave any stones left unturned.
Roxy, do you think that and Brian too, do you think that the impact, when I think of home improvement, right, I think of home equity loans and availability of credit, the impact that interest rates have had on homeowners' ability to finance work, do you think that maybe has had any impact on it?
Well, I think it's a really good question, Jason. I think there's a lot to unpack with these two categories. I think certainly availability of credit, for larger scale kind of home improvement projects and so forth. Certainly, it's very expensive now, and people are not going to take out home equity lines of credit. They may not even be approved at the same rate they were previously. But I think what's actually impacting these numbers is really just the kind of the constraints and kind of stalling in some ways of the home kind of market, right? People are locked into low interest rate loans. They're not interested in, even if they could afford to trade up, they're not really interested in that because obviously you're taking a risk, taking on a 7% interest rate loan versus a 3.5%, you may currently have or something like that. And certainly you don't know, are you going to be able to refinance in the future at a lower rate? And there's a lot of speculation on that. So the housing market is essentially kind of a bit locked up right now. And certainly interest rates is a huge contributor to that. So I think you're right, Jason. There may be some impact from availability of credit for larger home improvement projects, but even frankly, people are kind of settled in. As Roxy said, they did a lot of work on their house and in their gardens previously. I think home furnishing specifically, what you see here, I think is very much evidence of a highly promotional environment in the home furnishings and kitchen space, because conversion rate is very good. It's very healthy. And yet sales, traffic, average order size are down. So it's a very promotional environment, I think, in that category. And I think sales are reflected that. Home improvement, we also need to recognize that traffic was actually up while sales and conversion rate and average order size were down. I think you need to recognize that the home improvement category is a omni-channel, very much an omni-channel category. And the pandemic really drove consumers to embrace the online experience. But they may be actually converting those orders in store, building baskets, in-store pickup. Those numbers are not necessarily reflected as online sales. And, that's just a very normal behavior now. If I'm going to do a weekend project, I might make sure I'm picking everything up on a Thursday or a Friday so I have everything. But I ordered it online. I picked it up at the store. It's very convenient. Many of the home improvement retailers have really streamlined that experience, and the consumer is adapted to that. So it's an omni-channel. All of these categories clearly are omni-channel, but home improvement especially, I think it's reflected here in these numbers.
Yep. And that's a really great point. I mean, for all of these, apparel, any retail, we also have to consider this is commerce, but where consumers choose to shop and browse can be completely different. And so where one channel is soft, the other could be performing very well.
That's right. And so we have to be really cautious about judging the sales results. And I think the media at times can overly index on this, not realizing like, oh, there's actually a very positive role that the digital channels are playing in the overall business. And that's reflected, I think, for sure in these home improvement numbers.
Yeah, let's put a pin in that when we get to the B2B discussion.
Exactly.
Getting there right now. So Jason, are you ready for some B2B wisdom? Also, if anyone watching is from B2C, stay tuned, because after this section, we are sharing our holiday predictions. So stay tuned for that. But let's jump into B2B and let's look at the distributors. So in the B2B distributors sector, we faced an overall downward trend in sales and slight decrease in traffic for both year over year and year to date. While we've seen some fluctuations in the conversion rate, there was a small year to date increase, and the average order size has seen a decrease of around 5% for both periods, so year over year and year to date. Jason, your take on the distributors, what's the data saying?
Yeah, so the talk in the industry is that, we're sort of coming out of this period of rapid price hikes, rapid inflationary period. The surveys that I saw last week were basically these companies were looking at pushing through 8 to 11% price increases on their customers, which, if you're a distributor and you're able to pass through a price increase that big, that's great at the time. But now we're in today, and unfortunately, most distributors are not able to continue to push through 8 to 11% price increases every year. So some of the revenue-driven numbers, the perspective that I'm seeing there is we're kind of sobering up and coming back down to reality. Another factor on the average order size is that during the pandemic and the last few years, there's been a lot of supply chain problems, trying to get availability of materials, getting input of material. Like, there's been a lot. I think that may have also contributed somewhat to the drop in traffic. If I'm able to go to my regular distributor and they've got it in stock and they can ship it today, I don't need to necessarily go to my secondary or tertiary sources of that equipment. So there's less panic searching for materials to get this job done if I can go to my first preferred source. So I think there's just a lot of what we're seeing in the numbers, I think, this quarter are just kind of like right sizing and for lack of a better term, sobering up and coming back to normal. Now that being said, it looks like most of what I'm seeing from people that I talked to last week were looking, basically we're not expecting there to be a big crash. We're not expecting there to be but it's basically just going to kind of level off for a while. Minor growth, maybe more in that sort of, 2 to 4% range, which I think is, we'd all be perfectly happy to sign up for that, ad infinitum. That'd be great. But, there's some definitely, and the other factor, as we touched on earlier, is certainly in home improvement and home furnishings, like there's definitely I'm going to go shop online, but I'm going to go and buy it in the store. That factor is even more of an impact in B2B, where I might have to place my orders via EDI or a procurement system, and those numbers don't get necessarily counted here. So I think that may also be factoring into it a little bit, but that's been factoring into it for a while.
Jason, despite the strength overall in the economy, and we certainly have been talking all year about kind of recession, looming, and I think that's really impacted decision making, in terms of new plants, new investment, right? All these kinds of different things, and now there's certain sectors of the economy that have also been impacted by labor relations and things like that, the large sectors of the economy. And certainly some of the conflicts occurring, have kind of shifted, distribution and spending kind of markets to some degree. Do you think that's also an impact here? Is there sort of still kind of a level of conservatism in the B2B market that's somewhat reflected here?
Yeah, I think that there was, going into this year, right, the word in the industry was that we were going to have a recession, right? Like Q1, Q2, it was coming. Everybody was like girding their loins. People were kind of like, hey, let's tap down on inventory. Let's just get through this. Let's hunker down. And I think we'll see this even more as we get into the manufacturing numbers. But like there was a lot of conservatism in the B2B space but the job market has kind of pulled the entire economy through it. I mean, just the jobs numbers from what was the last month of $300,000, 300,000 jobs more than what was expected. So, on the manufacturing side, like we're seeing huge growth because now these companies are like, oh, well, suddenly the demand is still there. So like we've tapped down our inventories and we need to kind of get caught up. And to your point, Brian, certainly in the automotive sector right now, seeing what's happening there, a lot of uncertainty about like, oh, can we get parts? Like we're starting to see those orders come back. And I think it's going to be kind of a little bit of a game of chicken to see, are the orders going to come back before they can get the labor agreements in place to actually fulfill those orders? So I think some people are starting to buy up a little bit right now. But yeah, it's interesting.
Jason, as you look at the numbers for distributors in particular, what do you feel are some of the biggest unlocks? And I ask because one of my thoughts is around personalization and, moving from this one size fit all model to more of a variety of experiences based on the different customers. I know in talking to many of our customers, they are looking at personalization or already personalization and think about customer segmentation. So I'm just curious to know your thoughts there.
Yeah, I think that is the thing that buyers have been asking for years, right? Like if I had a nickel for every time I've had somebody say, I want an Amazon-like experience on, insert distributor website here. And like, if I'm a buyer for a hospital and I search for gloves, I don't want to see the same things as a welder working in a fab shop at a machine shop. Like having the ability to completely change your experience based, and B2B has this wonderful advantage where almost all of the buyers come in and log in before they start shopping because they want to get their pricing. They want to get their inventory. There are certain products in the catalog that they're only supposed to buy from this company. So this gives B2B distributors really a leg up, certainly on B2C, because they should know a lot more about that buyer before they go in, and they can completely personalize the experience. And I think that's what we're seeing, Roxy, is our customers who are bringing that capability to bear are really seeing some results from it.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's now switch gears to B2B manufacturers. So let's look at the numbers. Starting with the positives, sales has seen increase in year-over-year and year-to-date. What stands out the most are the conversion rates, very high numbers for both year-over-year and year-to-date. And looking at the decreases, we're seeing 20% down in traffic and around 30% for average order size. Jason, what's happening with the conversion rates?
Well, I'm going to take these conversion rates with a bit of a grain of salt, just until we can dig in a little bit more and get some more data. This is the first quarter that we've actually split these figures between manufacturers and distributors. So this is one of the reasons I'm excited to join these calls going forward. Is I think there's a lot of there are big differences between the way that manufacturers operate online and the way that distributors operate online. If you're a manufacturer and you have a website where you can take orders, odds are that if somebody's coming to your website in B2B, they're probably not just browsing. It's probably because they've got either a scheduled delivery that they have to get placed or just-in-time delivery. Like there's an urgency when you're buying from manufacturers. So it doesn't surprise me to see conversion rates, be a lot higher on the manufacturing side. It does surprise me to see them that much higher, year over year. But that may be just because we had like a couple, like we may have had some new customers come online who have really now, because of the success of their experience, been driving that number. I think we'll get more into that probably in the next quarter as we get more data and those numbers smooth out.
It is really interesting, though, to see the strength of the manufacturing market here with sales so strong. And I think it reflects, to me, some maturation of manufacturers embracing a direct model for maybe smaller customers, even sort of, B2B2C kind of models. They may still be, of course, working with their larger accounts through EDI and so forth and various procurement systems, but certainly, the maturation of their direct e-commerce experience, which is something we've frankly been talking about for many years. But it's clearly the pandemic really accelerated that, and I think we're starting to see some of the benefits from that in this sector. And I think it's a real positive sign. It may not be positive for the distributors, but it's certainly, I think, a positive for the manufacturers and for their customers who, frankly, want to buy from the business that has the product, has the kind of the content around that product to help them understand, is this the right tool or part or what have you for the application that I have in mind. And a lot of that really needs to come from the manufacturers. The distributors will try, but typically they're leveraging the manufacturers for that. So anyway, I think this is maybe a reflection of a shift finally starting to really pay some dividends between distribution and manufacturing and the maturation of the e-commerce channel for manufacturers.
Yeah, the surveys have shown for a long time that B2B buyers, when you ask them who do they want to buy from, they've consistently said, I want to buy from the manufacturers. And I
Right.
get it, right? Like the manufacturer is going to have the stuff and I'm gonna know it's that I know it's genuine. I know it's probably not been sitting on if I'm buying adhesive, I want to buy adhesive that's fresh, not that's been sitting on a shelf for 6 months. The problem has been generally that manufacturers, have not offered e-commerce. They have leaned on their distributors to create a digital experience that works. And frankly, most distributors' digital experience is not that great. They have underinvested. And so those buyers who want to buy online, if they go to a distributor to buy a product and they can't find it and it's not the right stuff and they don't trust it, they're going to be more inclined to go somewhere else to buy the product. This, I think, is one of the big reasons why Amazon Business has grown so much and so quickly, because it's a familiar experience that people understand what it is. And all right, hey, if I can't find it on the distributor I've been using, but I still want to buy online, I'm going to go to what I know. And that's what manufacturers get nervous about, because when you go to Amazon, yes, your product might be there, but also competitors' product, private label product from other competitors, like no name, awful, super cheap brands that are they're using the Amazon marketing efforts to leverage up their way up to the top.
That may be made in the same factory you manufacture your own
Probably
product
are,
in.
exactly. but that I think is what's a lot of, when I have conversations with manufacturers, they're asking me about this. It's like, how much longer can I wait to start for my distributors to create an experience that can represent my product well? Because if they're not, then we have to do it ourselves. Otherwise, we're going to lose business to the competition who is.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I've worked for a couple of different manufacturers in the past, and one, the e-commerce experience might not be where it needed to be to really create a best-in-class experience for the customer. Mm-hmm. But the upsides to doing that is you own that relationship with the customer. The customer is sure that they're getting genuine parts or a genuine product from you. And there's the margin impact and other aspects of it, of really investing in the experience. And one of the things that I'm very interested in about manufacturers is also the customer acquisition. If you're going to do it well, thinking about your customer acquisition strategy as well, to really bring those customers in and get them to buy from you.
Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Roxy. The point on margin, I think, is so valuable, because obviously the difference between selling wholesale, where you may be at 10, 15 points, and selling at retail, or I should say not necessarily retail, but direct in a B2B context, pretty significant impact. And I think once manufacturers really get a taste of that, the horse is out of the barn, right?
Yeah.
And not only do the customers want to buy direct, but just as we saw in the B2C market, where CPG companies in the footwear and apparel categories, for example, a number of years ago leaned in a little bit, but once a few really embraced it and said, we're willing to sacrifice our retail relationships for the direct model, the horse was out of the barn, so to speak, and the margins are just incredible, relatively speaking. And so I think we're going to see this trend obviously continue. It'll just be interesting to see how fast it accelerates.
Yeah,
exactly.
Drop shipping. It all started with drop shipping, right? Once distributors forced manufacturers to learn how to ship onesie, twosie types of orders.
It's so true.
Slippery slope.
Yep, exactly.
You're so right.
Great insights on B2B, and there will be definitely more coming from Bloomreach in future sessions from B2B, courtesy of Jason. But now let's look at the holiday season trends and a little bit of a look into the future. So we're approaching the final quarter of 2023, both exciting and stressful for many watching this session right now here with us. So we have a forecast and some predictions to help you paint a picture of what to expect. And as you can see, holiday retail e-commerce sales in the US is expected to hit the $254 billion mark in 2023, which is an 11% increase from the previous year. Starting with Brian, looking at this number, what will be the main trends shaping and helping this growth this holiday season?
Yeah, I mean, these are from Insider Intelligence. Those are U.S. numbers, so projecting an 11% year-over-year growth rate in the U.S. market for holiday. I think there's reasons to believe that could be true. Not only the strength overall of the U.S. economy and consumers, generally speaking, spending, relatively speaking, versus saving. We see this trend and sort of a generational trend as well. And it is somewhat driven by the kind of freezing up, as we talked about earlier, of the housing market. So consumers are spending in the U.S., the labor market is strong, et cetera, et cetera. So there's reasons to believe that the holiday season in the U.S. could be very strong. And we will see this shift again from services back to goods as people kind of turn to gift giving. And kind of getting their homes ready for a big holiday season and so forth. So I think there's reasons to believe. I think 11% seems a little aggressive to me. So maybe I wouldn't necessarily say I think it'll hit 11% year-over-year growth, but it could be in the high single digits, maybe 10%. I would feel comfortable projecting that. I do think in the EU and Europe, it will be a different story. Again, as I mentioned earlier, kind of on the precipice of a recessionary environment. They may already be in a recession. It's just, you can't really tell until you look kind of in the rearview mirror a bit. I think we're going to see energy prices go up again, unfortunately, due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but also the situation happening in Israel and Palestine, which is relatively fresh, but it will absolutely have an impact on energy and commodity prices. And hopefully there's not more escalation of that conflict, which could potentially impact how consumers feel. I think it'll be more acute in Europe and in the UK because of the sensitivity on energy prices and the dependency on imported energy relative to North America. But it may end up impacting, it's sort of a unpredictable event to some degree in terms of the economic environment that we're in. So I think it'll be a little different story in the UK and in Europe, and it just sort of shows that these are economies on a little bit of a different track. Tourism really buoyed the European and UK economies through much of 2023, but that's going to obviously tail off as well. So I think it could be a bit of a challenging holiday season and into next year, unfortunately, for retailers, especially in Europe and in the UK. But I think in the US, we will see a reasonably strong holiday, is my prediction.
Roxy, as a former practitioner, what promotions will most likely convince buyers to shop from a certain brand or retailer this season?
If I had a crystal ball, I would definitely share that with all of you. But the right promotion really depends on your customer. And I would say, instead of focusing in on what promotion is going to convince consumers to buy, I would focus on ensuring that your experience meets consumer needs, that you're making data-informed decisions, and that the voice of the customer is ingrained in your strategy and your tactics. Sure, consumers are seeking a discount, but they are also seeking to be inspired and delighted. And we must not forget that as we venture into the holiday season.
Oh, I'm definitely seeking a discount. I would be that kind of shopper.
Always.
But you're absolutely right. Jason, so what about B2B and the holiday season? What can you tell us?
You would think that people are asking, like, why is Jason talking right now? Because there is no point. But I want to tell you a funny story. So when I was at Amazon and we were starting up Amazon Business, one of the most effective things that we found to get new customers was Q4. Because what we found is that in Q4, the consumers would be coming to the website and they would be looking for certain products that we carried that had B2B, but also consumer crossover. So sharpening stones, like we carried product from Norton, and we carried water stones and oil stones that people use for sharpening, like, woodworking equipment. And we could not keep them in stock. Like, we did not expect going in that we would get any activity whatsoever. But what we found is that every year we would come in, our traffic would kind of like be slow growing. We get to Q4, it would shoot through the roof. But then those customers stuck around. Like, we didn't see going into Q1 that things dropped back down. What we saw is that the experience that we created, because people were able to come and see it once because of that huge spike in traffic, but then people stuck around and said, like, oh, these guys carry Norton sharpening stones. They must also carry Norton grinding stones and Norton sandpaper belts and Norton flap discs. So the thing that I took away from all of that is the power of having a good customer experience. If you can leverage that to get that experience in front of new buyers, however you can do it, it'll continue to pay dividends for you as you get into the new year. So, like, if you've got some product that you think might have some consumer crossover, like, hey, why not? Put together your, like, starting right now, like, say, like, hey, we've got, water stones, we've got sharpening stones, like, whatever it takes to kind of get people to be thinking about you for their needs that aren't necessarily B2B, and getting them to try your experience around, oh, I can search for something and I actually find it. And this accessory is actually relevant. Like, that just reinforces the strategy of being a compete on experience type of distributor, as opposed to competing on price or competing on availability. Those are really hard rows to hoe. But if you've got something that's worth showing off, don't stop just because it's the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Appreciate the perspectives from all of you, and I believe that our listeners found today's conversation enlightening as well. So once again, big thank you to Brian, Roxy, and Jason for sharing their expertise with us today. And if you want to know more from their knowledge, you can connect with them on LinkedIn or visit the Bloomreach website. And for ongoing commerce insights, you can check out Commerce Experience podcast featuring Brian Walker, and also his latest edition of the newsletter Cocktails and Commerce. And also, Brian now has a strategic advisory firm, so you can check that out as well. Brian, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your endeavors and your advisory?
Yeah, so I as I mentioned earlier, I'm now the former Chief Strategy Officer of Bloomreach. It's great to be back here for Commerce Pulse, something that we started early on, as I mentioned at the top of the show, early on in the pandemic, and has really become a great way for us to share the benchmarking. You know, for you as a retailer or a B2B distributor or manufacturer to understand how you stand relative to your peers, and for us to contextualize the numbers and talk about them. So it's great to see this continue, and I know it will continue as I kind of move on into the next phase of my career. I would encourage all of you to subscribe to that newsletter, Cocktails in Commerce. It's on Substack. It is free. Would love to have you subscribe. I share my knowledge and wisdom around cocktails, mocktails, and of course the commerce industry, with really a focus on the ISV, the technology providers, and the services providers. And my boutique strategic advisory firm is really focused on serving that market. So if you are a services provider or you are a technology provider and you're interested, please reach out to me. LinkedIn is probably the easiest way to find me, and reach out, and I'd love to talk to you about how I might be able to help you out. But that's not what we're here to celebrate. We're here to celebrate Bloomreach and Commerce Pulse and all of you out there driving your business. And again, it's a pleasure to be here. And I look forward to being back, maybe in the future, as a guest. So thank you very much. And I know the show's in good hands with Terka, Roxana, Roxy, and Jason.
Thank you, Brian, for driving Commerce Pulse and getting us to this point, and we hope to make you proud with our future editions. And to everyone watching, thanks again for tuning in with us today, and we look forward to having you with us next quarter. Bye, everyone.